Wow, okay, this book was a lot. Today we are going to be reviewing Shari Franke's book, The House of My Mother, A Daughter's Quest for Freedom. But first, we need to have a little background on this whole just absolutely absurd situation surrounding this book. This woman grew up living in her own personal psychological horror movie, okay? Shari Franke is the oldest daughter of Ruby Franke, the Mormon momfluencer behind the once popular family vlog 8 Passengers. As we discuss the book today, we're going to go through the wild ride that is the 8 Passenger saga, which ended up turning into the Connections cult saga. But for a brief summary, for those of you who have never heard of 8 Passengers, here's an overview. Ruby and Kevin Franke, a Mormon couple living in Utah, started a family vlog called 8 Passengers back in 2015, which is now 10 years ago. That blows my mind. The title 8 Passengers comes from the number of people in the family, the 2 parents, Ruby and Kevin, plus their 6 children. This vlog contains everything from family outings and vacations to more intimate, private, and invasive moments that many children would not want blasted publicly to millions of viewers, but that is how family vlogging tends to go. At its peak, 8 Passengers had over 2 million subscribers. However, that success came crashing down in 2020, 5 years into the vlog's run, when Ruby and Kevin's oldest son, Chad, let it slip in a video that, as a punishment for pranking one of his younger siblings, his parents had taken away his bed for 7 months. When viewers heard this news, they were shocked. Was it possible that this seemingly wholesome on the surface family vlog was actually a front for excusing child abuse behind the scenes? If Chad, then 16 years old, felt so comfortable publicly announcing that his mother was depriving him of a bed, what else could be going on in private? What were they not sharing? As the vlog began to lose subscribers and former fans began seeking out warning signs in the vlog's previous content, Ruby Franke grew closer and closer with a disgraced therapist turned scammy girl boss life coach named Jody Hildebrandt. Ruby became Jody's second in command as she grew the life coaching program she'd founded called Connections, taking it beyond a personal development program and into the realm of a full-blown cult. Over time, and we're going to get into more specifics throughout the book, Ruby and Kevin's relationship crumbled. Ruby and Jody grew closer until eventually in 2023, police were alerted to the fact that the youngest of the 8 Passengers kids had been neglected for nearly a week with signs of physical abuse and neglect that led directly to Ruby and Jody's arrests. At the start of 2024, Ruby was sentenced to between 4 and 60 years in prison, where she currently resides today. Just last month, at the start of 2025, Ruby's oldest daughter, Shari, who has recently finished college and is now in the process of trying to heal from a life growing up in the spotlight without her consent, she released her own memoir, a book detailing what it was like growing up as one of the child stars of a family vlog, how much of her own youth was taken away from her, and her own process of discovering personal freedom and autonomy. Videos like this one can be really difficult to make because the subject matter is so serious. Sometimes, even with serious topics, I'm able to use humor to diffuse the situation, or maybe I'll make a little stop motion skit with my dolls for fun, to like make fun of people in power who are exploiting us. But when we get situations like this one, when we get books like this, it just really feels like there's no joking to be done. As I discuss the events of this book, I'm not going to go into super explicit details about the harms done to these kids, and I'm not going to discuss any of the children by name except for Shari and her brother Chad, both of whom are now adults and have consented to being discussed by name in Shari's book. One of the things that I really respect about Shari's decisions in writing this book is her choice to leave out the names of her younger siblings, those who are still under the age of 18, and to omit the graphic details of the worst things that they endured. Family vlogs profit from spectacle and schadenfreude. In fact, I think reality TV and reality TV-like offshoots such as family vlogs find success in their ability to appeal to people's, for lack of a better term, human sacrifice instincts. I know that sounds really dark, but in a lot of ways, I think people who seek out excessive, graphic true crime content or fall down the rabbit hole of these family vlog expose type videos can do so with this freak show entertainment style mindset, and I really do not want to appeal to that because these kids have already endured enough. And just to be clear, I know that not everyone who takes an interest in these type of stories does so with those darker and more sinister motivations. I know plenty of people, for example, example, might watch true crime content because it's a way to explore their own fears or to trick themselves into feeling more protected in some way by being aware of what the worst possible scenarios are. Plenty of people also enjoy seeing the downfall of family vlogs because they hope that it's going to be genuinely better for the children in the future, and because they like seeing the parents get the punishments that they deserve. I get that. I like seeing that too. But at the same time, I just don't want this video to be a source of drama or shock value entertainment. I want it to be a place where we can discuss Shari's choices in choosing to share her own story and what that means for the future of kids growing up with influencer parents. And since Shari herself was uncomfortable with naming her younger siblings or graphically detailing the abuse that they personally experienced, I'm also going to refrain from doing that. So with that in mind, let's get into it. When I first decided I wanted to review this book, I went ahead and downloaded the audio version, which was just fantastic to listen to because the author, Shari Franke, read the book herself, and it was incredible to hear her telling her own story out loud. Before we move into the details of today's book review, I need to give a quick thank you to this video's sponsor, which made listening to this audiobook possible. Today's video is sponsored by Raycon, who made the wireless everyday earbuds I use to listen to this entire book. When I first started reading this book, I was in the process of going back to the gym and getting back into my exercise routine after overcoming COVID at the start of the year, followed by a back injury. So as a result, I was doing a lot of walking, especially on the treadmill, as I worked on getting myself conditioned back into my normal exercise routine. The everyday earbuds from Raycon were perfect for listening to this story on the treadmill. With 32-hour battery life, I didn't have to worry about stopping to recharge them once, and with active noise cancellation features, I was able to stay focused on the book even when I ventured out to do some other chores like grocery shopping along the way. I also have to say, these are the most comfortable earbuds that I've ever used in my life. In the past, I used to avoid using earbuds for too long. Instead, I'd opt for like big over-ear headphones, or I would just not listen to things when I was out in public at all, because so many earbuds would make my ears sore after they were in there for too long, but these earbuds never do. They sit nicely in my ears and they're just perfectly comfortable. Plus, I love the blush violet color that I chose for my earbuds. I love the range of fun colors that are available, and I got them in a protective case in the color Purple Clouds, so I get really excited when I get to go out and carry them with me. I'm a simple person, okay? I like when things have cute colors and patterns, plus they recharge while they're in their case, so that's super convenient. If you're interested in trying Raycon for yourself, head to the link in my description below, buyraycon.com/savvy to get 20% off site-wide. That's right, you could get 20% off on the entire Raycon website, including 20% off of all headphones too, when you use my link, buyraycon.com/savvy. When you use my link in the description below, you will also be helping to support my channel, and I hope you enjoy listening to audiobooks as much as I've been. Thank you again to Raycon for sponsoring this video, and now let's get back into our book review. I've had multiple people request that I review this book, and then based on how successful my previous book reviews of Jeanette McCurdy's book and Doormat Mom's book have done views-wise, I'm starting to get the vibe that a lot of you guys like when I discuss books about people who have bad relationships with their moms or like with their parents in general. I'm fortunate enough to have a great relationship with my mom, but I can understand how it might feel healing to see others illustrating a similar struggle to what you might be going through. Like I've mentioned in some of my other memoir reviews, the past few years have really been a time for the now adults who were forced into fame as children to reclaim their own stories, and I really love seeing that happen. We've seen this with the aforementioned success of Jeanette McCurdy's book, plus back in 2023 I reviewed Jill Duggar's book, and we're seeing that kids who grew up in the absolute hell that was a TLC show finally getting to share their own perspectives unfiltered. I think that is so empowering, and it's a conversation that really needs to happen if we want to end the extremely unethical practices of family vlogging or putting kids on reality TV. I guess we should just call it what it is. It's child labor. Okay, it's child labor. So let's get into the specifics behind this book. First up, the Ghostwriter. Let's address this first. Yes, this book was ghostwritten, and I do like to discuss that process when I'm at the start of reviewing memoirs. I discussed this when I reviewed the memoirs of Prince Harry, of Britney Spears, of Jill Duggar. I like to discuss this aspect because I think it helps frame my review as we go forward. This book was ghostwritten by an author named Caroline Ryder, who is known for her journalism and her ghostwriting of other celebrity books. I believe Shari credits her in the book as a co-writer, and when it comes to a book like this, I think think that makes a lot of sense. So the way the process tends to work is a ghostwriter will work along with the subject of the book, in this case, Shari, conducting tons of interviews, recording hundreds of hours of her telling her own story, and then that person, in this case, Caroline Ryder, will take that story and then will rewrite it, trying to maintain as much of Shari's original voice as possible, but also structuring the book in a way that would have like foreshadowing, crafting sentences that will flow well one after the next, making sure each story is detailed enough to paint the full picture, often going back to the subject of the story for further interviews if the story needs more details or we need more things to flesh out each scene, etc. As a writer myself, I have always had a really strong appreciation for the ghostwriting process, and I love that skilled writers are out here making good money to tell important stories that the world needs, but stories that may not necessarily belong to people who are professional writers themselves. I think it creates a win-win-win scenario, right? So Caroline Ryder, the ghostwriter of this book, she gets paid for her work and expertise. Shari Franke gets to tell her own story on her own terms, and we, the readers, get to become enlightened to Shari's journey while reading a book that is well executed, enjoyable to read, and that flows well overall. I always like to start my reviews of these type of books with the discussion of the ghostwriter, and that's for a few reasons. First, if other people read this book, I don't want to see people being like, oh my god, this 21-year-old girl who's never written a book before and has no other publishing credit, she's already this good? Why isn't writing coming this easily to me? Should I just give up already? No, okay? In cases like this, it's because a lot of the quality of the writing itself, like the way the sentences are structured, the way the detailed examples flow, like we have like an establishing shot type of scene followed by a story with an example with more detailed scenes fleshing that out, the way that the language flows easily from one sentence to the next, all of those type of things, those pieces come from an experienced and professional writer. Never forget that writing itself is its own skill. It is one that we work on constantly improving, and it's a skill that people spend their entire lives trying to continue striving to get better at. The other reason I like to discuss the ghostwriter is to explain why, when I review this type of book, my review isn't going to focus as much on the writing itself as a reflection of the book's subject, because the writing style and the language choice don't necessarily solely come from Shari, if that makes sense. So, like, by contrast, when I reviewed Doormat Mom's book a couple weeks ago, I spent a lot of time looking at why did she choose to use passive voice here? Why did she use so many extra quotation marks? That's because she wrote the book all by herself, and when we look at those sentence-level choices, that can often give us a deeper look into what that author might be saying more indirectly or where their personal mindset might be. But in a ghost-written book, I tend to spend more of my time breaking apart the overall content. The writing is competent and it flows well, that's a given, so my discussions of the writing are going to focus more on which sections Shari chooses to flesh out and what her perspectives seem to be, rather than things like, how does the syntax reflect what might be going on here? How does this punctuation choice, like, what was this choice of verb tense? It's not going to be as much of that type of thing. So now, with that out of the way, let's discuss the next piece of this book that I found interesting, the title. So as I mentioned, this book is called The House of My Mother, A Daughter's Quest for Freedom, and I love what this title does in the same way that I loved the title of Jill Duggar's book, Counting the Cost. So for context, The House of My Mother comes from the Bible. It's from Song of Solomon 8:2, where the full quote is, I would lead you and bring you into the house of my mother, she who used to teach me. I would give you spiced wine to drink, the juice of my pomegranate. So similar to how Jill Duggar's book, Counting the Cost, had a title with a triple meaning. So in that case, there was the literal aspect of how her family was counting the actual financial costs of being on reality TV. There were examples of like Jim Bob itemizing receipts and giving them to his kids and using it as a bargaining chip to manipulate them. There's also the Bible reference in the Counting the Cost quote, plus then there's the reference to the show being 19 Kids and Counting. We get something similar here with The House of My Mother. The House of My Mother refers in the literal sense to Ruby Franke's house, the way that Ruby ran the house with an iron fist, the way Shari does not see this house as like my family's house or my childhood home or my home where I grew up, but the house of my mother, encapsulating the theme of how stifled Shari used to feel under Ruby's thumb before she was able to escape from that environment. Then we have the fact that it is a direct Bible reference, and since religion and the Bible are going to play such major roles in the story, I think that connects well. So much of the story is influenced by the Mormon church and the specific practices that that Mormonism encourages and allows, which, much like Jill Duggar's story of, Christianity, it includes Shari's personal journey of reclaiming her own faith, discovering what spirituality means to her outside of what her mother used to force it to mean for her. Then when we look at the Bible verse saying, "I would lead you and bring you into the house of my mother," that reference serves as a way for Shari to welcome us into her life. She's sharing the house of my mother with all of us. She's inviting us into Ruby's house to see what the most intimate and disturbing moments of her childhood were like behind the facade that Ruby tried to present to us. I'm not sure if Shari chose the title herself. I'm not sure if the ghostwriter did or maybe someone at Simon & Schuster did, but regardless, I think the title is a really effective choice, consolidating so many of the book's themes well into one short phrase that really packs a punch. And just side note here, okay? I know a lot of people get annoyed at me when I do book review videos, and I spend a lot of time talking about these type of things at length, like the ghostwriter and the title choice and things like that. I can guarantee that there will be someone, and it's probably going to be multiple people, who are going to leave a comment on this video saying, like, video starts at this timestamp, and the timestamp is undoubtedly going to be a timestamp later than wherever we are right now. This happens on pretty much like every book review video of this type that I do. And the reason that I continue to do my reviews this way, okay, I want to make this clear. I think sometimes people click on my book reviews wanting the juicy details of what's in the book, and I have to be honest, guys, I am not a drama channel and I never have been. I'm a literary analysis channel, analyzing the choices behind the ghostwriter, the choices behind the title of the book. To me, that is as important as everything else that we're going to unpack when it comes to analyzing a book as a book. Especially since I know people like to come to my channel to get writing advice or to be inspired to improve their own writing. I think it's really important to discuss how things like the title of the book, the overall context in which the book exists, things like that. Like it or not, how we title our books is a huge piece of how successful the book is going to be, both from a commercial and financial success perspective, but also in terms of how memorable the book and its themes will be to the audience long term. The title of this book gives us a glimpse into the core themes of it from the get-go. In one short phrase, "The House of My Mother," we learn that this is going to be a book with religious allusions, a book about a life influenced by a sect of Christianity, a book about growing up in a house governed by a mother, not a warm childhood home that Shari thinks of as her own. So now that we've discussed the title, let's get into a detailed summary of the book as a whole, and then after we break down the events of the book, we can discuss some of the further religious and cultural implications that come from how we might further read and understand it. Full book breakdown. So towards the beginning of the book, Shari enlightens us with an extremely interesting bit of background context. The Mormon Church and Mormon communities both directly and indirectly encourage and perpetuate the practice of family vlogging. On this channel, we have talked so many times about how many conservative Christian communities in the US, and Mormon communities especially and in particular, they tend to lead to the continued success of multi-level marketing companies, or MLMs. And I found a lot of similar reasons also apply to how family vlogging, which is another unethical and predatory industry, has been allowed to flourish unquestioned in Mormon communities as well. So for example, in the past we've discussed how Mormon communities encourage men to be the primary financial providers of the home and for women to prioritize raising children, and in Mormon communities it's very common to have a lot of children. Well, the harsh truth is, in America, in the 2020s, if you have a lot of children, like, what the Mormon Church encourages, you are going to have a really hard time raising your family on one income. But the culture surrounding religion often pressures women to be stay-at-home moms, even if their family needs a second income to survive. On top of that, getting a job outside of the home is pretty hard when you have a ton of children, because how are you going to pay for all that daycare? Basically, what I'm saying is all of the problems that we discuss here, they all link to capitalism. At the end of the day, 100% of the time, that's the root cause, okay? So in these cases, MLM companies, for example, will lure these moms into their schemes by promising them the ability to earn money working from home while raising their kids at the same time, which of course ends up being a scam. They end up losing money and going into financial distress. We've talked about that a million times already. But family vlogging does something very similar. You need to earn a side income, but you need to focus on raising your kids. Okay, no problem. Just record everything your kids do while you're already watching them and then put it on the internet internet for money. In a way, it almost feels like the Mormon church encourages family vlogging even more than how much they encourage MLMs, and they encourage MLMs a lot, okay? And that's because, as Shari explains toward the beginning of the book, Mormons are very big on recording everything about their lives for future generations. Shari talks a lot about writing in her journal, about how Ruby often wrote in her own journal, how families would regularly photograph and film parts of their lives so that then they could pass those memories on to later generations. I definitely see the appeal of this from a sentimental perspective. I love doing that kind of thing as well. The problem is with the business of family vlogging. So full disclosure, I am against family vlogging in general. I do not like the idea of parents pressuring or even forcing their children to share their entire lives online. As an adult who creates content on the internet, I know that I'm going to get mean comments sometimes. I'm going to have people making assumptions about me. I'm going to face both praise and criticism, but as an adult, I can make that choice. That is my choice to accept those terms. Plus, creating content for the internet involves a lot of work. And guess what? I'm against child labor. So if you out there as a mom or a dad, if you want to vlog about your own journey of being a parent, you want to make videos to give other parents advice, go for it, okay? That's your own choice, your own life. Just please don't put your kids on camera. Don't share their faces. Don't share their names. Don't make them perform for your audience. Definitely do not share their private moments with the entire world, okay? As Shari explains, her mother Ruby has always been this very success-driven type A personality, and Ruby enjoyed being in control of her own life and others' lives. Shari even discusses that perhaps had Ruby grown up in a community that had less emphasis on these traditional gender roles and boxing people into these specific roles that they have to fulfill, maybe instead Ruby could have used those skills that she had to manage a company or to make big sales. But since Ruby always felt that her role primarily had to be a mother before everything else, she ended up instead exerting that desire for control over her own children. So one thing throughout this book that I guess this is like a slight criticism. One thing I wasn't totally sold on was Shari's depiction of her relationship with her father, Kevin. Throughout the book, Shari portrays Kevin as Ruby's sidekick. Ruby is the one who's out here calling the shots. Kevin's just kind of along for the ride. And I can see how that's definitely true to an extent, okay? As we're going to learn, Ruby is nothing short of an abusive mother. And often when parents abuse their own children, they may also be enacting similar behaviors and similar types of control over their spouses or their romantic partners. Kevin is in a really strange position in this book of being both a victim and an enabler. At least from Shari's perspective, it's clear that Kevin does not yearn for control in the same way that Ruby does, but he's also has no problem with upholding the same oppressive structures as Ruby. So for example, Shari talks about how she learned to play the piano as a child. Ruby and Kevin both played piano growing up, and as Shari explains, it was one of the things that Ruby and Kevin first bonded over when they first met in college and started dating, and Ruby was really intent on passing those piano skills down to her kids. So she had Shari start taking piano lessons, and when Shari would practice along with Ruby, she recalls often being in fear. She'd worry about messing up. She would fear what Ruby's reaction would be if she made too many mistakes. Ruby was no stranger to using physical force on her kids as a form of negative reinforcement, and Shari recalls Ruby giving her like a little slap on the face or on the hand if she got something wrong while she was playing piano. So when Shari's in piano lessons with her teacher, the teacher at one point says that maybe they should spend more time working on the particular song that they're learning because Shari hasn't quite grasped it yet, and Shari immediately starts panicking. She knows that if her report from her teacher is anything less than perfect, that Ruby is going to unleash some rage on her, and Shari is terrified of her mother's reaction. Eventually, like, Shari starts crying during the piano lesson, and her teacher is able to pick up on her stress enough that she's like, all right, I'm not going to make you do the piece anymore, which honestly, very scary stuff. It's really heartbreaking to read these early scenes from Shari's childhood, but like, believe it or not, it only gets so much worse as it goes on. So anyway, Shari starts to feel very lonely and afraid, and eventually she asks her parents if she can go to therapy. Kevin is on board with this from the get-go, and he's initially like, yes, thank you for telling us, thank you for sharing your emotions with us, we want you to be happy, we can get you into some therapy. So it's definitely clear that Kevin, at least in Shari's portrayal of him, is very conflicted. He wants to appease his wife and he wants his kids to be happy, but those things are often in direct conflict with one another, but in the end, he always chooses Ruby. If you want to get a more in-depth exploration of Shari's portrayal of Kevin in this book, I highly recommend checking out the review that my friend Rachel Oates put out of this book like last week. She goes really in-depth into all the times that Shari excuses Kevin's behavior and I think she does a good job breaking down why the story doesn't always land as hard in those parts. It's very hard to write about your own trauma, especially when you're very young and you're not that far removed from the events having recently happened. To be clear, I think that Shari has every right to forgive her father, and I think it's a good thing that she does have a parental figure in her life right now because she needs that support system. But her portrayal of him as solely a victim of Ruby's rather than also an enabler, that portrayal kind of fell flat for me. As an outside viewer, I can clearly see the ways that he also enabled Ruby's abuse of these kids for years. He helped create the family vlog. He was there broadcasting his kids' private moments to millions of viewers. He was online spreading homophobic talking points in favor of his Mormon faith. He went along with everything we're going to see later on with Jodi Hildebrandt and the Connections cult. So it's really hard to see Kevin as that much of an innocent bystander when he was also an adult. He was also entrusted with the care of these 6 children, and he also failed them. I guess it feels like Shari might still be too emotionally close to the situation. Her reunion with Kevin and their reconciliation was so recent when she wrote this book, so it might be hard for her to analyze his role in her abuse from a more objective perspective. That's just my thoughts on that. Anyway, back to therapy and the piano lessons in that part of the book. So Kevin agrees that Shari should try therapy, and Shari starts meeting with a therapist named Dr. Winters. She ends up making a lot of progress in therapy, and she gets to the point where she feels finally ready to tell Ruby that she does not want to take piano lessons anymore. She finds the piano stressful, she does not like it, she wants to pursue something else, okay? So with the help of Dr. Winters, Shari is able to sit down and explain this to Ruby, and to Shari's surprise, Ruby actually agrees. She says, okay, if you don't want to play piano anymore, I won't force you to do it. So at first Shari's relieved. She thinks therapy's working so well, it's helping her resolve these conflicts with her mother. But then, before Shari's next therapy session, Ruby tells her that she has canceled her future appointments. This scene was honestly like one of the most heartbreaking parts of the book. This crushed me, okay? Shari's having a meal before she's off to head to her usual therapy appointment, and Ruby announces, oh, actually, you're not going. Actually, you don't need therapy anymore. Dr. Winters called me and said, you've made enough progress. Your mental health is fine. You're cured. You don't need to. No more therapy. And Shari's just like, wait, okay, but actually I liked therapy. I don't feel like I'm all the way done. Can I please go back? And Ruby's like, no, your therapist says you don't need it. You don't have to go back. You're not going. It's pretty obvious that Ruby is lying to Shari here. The implication is that Ruby didn't like how the therapist empowered Shari to stand up to her and to stop taking piano lessons. And Ruby doesn't want Shari to develop any further self-advocacy skills, because then I guess that could threaten Ruby's control of the family. So Shari has to stop going to therapy now. A lot of Shari's childhood then continues on like that. She tries to please Ruby, and when she does what Ruby wants, she gets love bombed, and then when she goes against Ruby's wishes, she gets either physically punished or emotionally manipulated. And then when Shari's in 8th grade, that's when Ruby's like, we're starting up the 8 Passengers YouTube channel, and then she starts vlogging everything. What I found really interesting was that Ruby's entire family does the vlogging thing. Like, Ruby's parents have a grandparent family vlog, and then Ruby's siblings all have their own family vlogs. So the idea of putting your family's private business online for money was normalized in this entire family from the beginning. Shari decides she also wants to make her own YouTube channel, I guess to earn some money for college on the side. And Ruby's like, okay, yeah, you can film your own skits for YouTube or whatever, but I'm not going to help you. You have to do all the work. We're self-made people in this family. So Shari's channel eventually reaches the point where she's able to monetize it, and Ruby, despite refusing to help Shari with the channel whatsoever, tells Shari that she is going to take 10% of all of Shari's ad revenue earnings as a management fee. The book never states it outright, but it's pretty clear the parallel that she's trying to draw here. Earlier in the book, Shari talks about her experience as a kid learning about how the Mormon church does the tithing practice, how all members have to give 10% of their income back to the church. Now Ruby is also going to take 10% of Shari's earnings, even though she refused to do any work to help her. It's almost like Ruby considers herself to be to Shari what the church is to her. Like, she considers herself to be her own family's equivalent of God. Also, please do not let your middle school child make a vlog for money, especially not if you're planning to profit from it too. Just like, stop making your kids earn your income for you, please. As the 8 Passengers family vlog grows, Ruby starts doing weirder and weirder things to get attention online. I think there's a section where she pressures Shari to like let her shave her eyebrows because she thinks it would make a good video to be like, mom shaves teen daughter daughter's eyebrows. It's super weird. It's clearly like this control tactic. But regardless, the vlog is gaining subscribers, it's doing well, and the family is making money. Along the way, Shari talks a lot about her brother Chad, who's like a year or so younger than her, and he's also going through his teen years in the spotlight the same way that she is. So Chad's kind of the goofball of the family. He seems like a pretty nice kid, but his thing is that he just doesn't take anything in life that seriously. He likes to play pranks on his siblings, and he's known as like the class clown kind of character at school. As far as I know, though, he never seems to have any serious behavioral issues or show any signs of like being a mean person. Normally, when a parent decides that their child has serious behavioral issues that require outside help without the child's consent to address them because they are that serious, those issues have to be major things. Normally, it's like maybe the kid has gotten involved with drugs, maybe the kid got involved with organized crime, maybe the kid has grown up to be a bully who torments other kids at school to the point of harming their physical and mental health. Things like that, okay? Chad never shows any of those type of behaviors. Chad is just a silly guy. But that means that Ruby can't control him, so she ends up sending him to one of those troubled teen camps. She goes like full Dr. Phil, send him to the ranch, okay? As we've seen over the past decade with the downfall of Dr. Phil, a lot of these teen wilderness therapy programs are just another front for abusing and controlling kids. So Chad goes to wilderness therapy. When he comes back, he ends up playing another prank on one of his younger siblings, and as a result, Ruby decides to take away his bed. 7 months go by with Chad having no access to a bed, and Ruby and Kevin, they just give him only a beanbag chair. That's his only option of what he can sleep on. This is a growing teenager, mind you, okay? I am an adult with back problems, and I am feeling physical phantom pains on Chad's behalf. What they are doing to this boy is inhumane. But the entire Franke family is just used to this at this point, so nobody even notices anything out of the ordinary with this. And then one day, the 8 Passengers vlog gets internet canceled. Ruby uploads a video to the 8 Passengers channel that includes a conversation between herself and Chad, where he mentions that he hasn't had access to a bed in 7 months. They sort of laugh about it because it's normal, everyday stuff for this family. Ruby doesn't even realize that her audience is going to find this concerning, and neither does Chad, because at this point, these punishments and things like this are just so normalized in this family. But the audience, thankfully, doesn't see it the same way. Tons of people start unsubscribing from the 8 Passengers vlog, and a lot of former fans start going back through the older videos to see if there were previous signs of abuse that they might have not seen before. And boy, do they find it! The biggest example is probably a video that Ruby put up on 8 Passengers where she's in a car talking about one of her youngest kids who was in kindergarten at the time. She talks about how her 5-year-old daughter forgot to pack her own lunch for school that day. The school called Ruby and told her that her daughter didn't have a lunch, and Ruby told the teacher not to give her daughter any food. She was clear that she didn't want anyone sharing their food with this kid, with her 5-year-old daughter, because she wanted her daughter, I guess, to learn a lesson about the importance of packing your own lunch. Okay, getting kids prepared to do things like pack food, that's not necessarily a bad thing. It's good to give your kids bits of responsibility along the way with your guidance, and then those responsibilities can build up over time. But Ruby and Kevin are the parents in this scenario. The kid was 5. Maybe this is just my crazy opinion, but if your kid is 5 years old, you should be supervising them to make sure they pack their lunch, if that's one of the chores that you've assigned them to do. You should be helping them pack their lunch. If they forget, you should notice that they forget and maybe find a way to remind them. Maybe ask something like, do you have everything you need for school today before they get on the bus? Maybe ask them leading questions about things like, oh, you're getting ready for school. Do you know what you plan to eat today? Something like that, right? It is the parent's responsibility to notice that this child didn't have food, and they dropped the ball on that. And then, on top of that, they told the school, don't let my kid have food. That's disgusting, okay? Kids need to eat during the school day. Kids have growing brains. They need to fuel those brains with food so that they are capable of learning. After finding this video, viewers continued combing through the 8 Passengers videos, and they found more and more examples of Ruby bragging about things like withholding food from her children as a form of punishment. So feeding your children is among the bare minimum of things that you are required to do as a parent. Letting your kids go hungry on purpose is probably one of the most clear-cut textbook signs of child abuse. But once again, those type of things were just so normalized in the Franke household that none of the parents or the kids thought it was weird to even say it out loud publicly or joke about it. So as this is all happening, Ruby meets a life coach named Jody Hildebrand. Jody was a former therapist, but after losing her license to practice therapy, she founded a company called Connections with an X. Connections is a life coaching company because guess what? If you lose your license to practice as a therapist, I guess you can just rebrand as a life coach. Jody was also a devout Mormon, though she didn't have a husband and her 2 kids didn't seem to want anything to do with her. This book also kind of makes it clear that Jody's probably a lesbian, but due to the Mormon church discouraging same-gender relationships, she kept that part of herself hidden, which we're going to unpack a little bit later in some of the later stuff we're going to see. This book starts to get at some of the Mormon community's anti-LGBTQ beliefs and how those beliefs can further perpetuate abuse cycles, but it stops short of really examining and picking it apart. We'll talk more about that in the next section. Jody had a reputation for tearing families apart. Normally, I am just not at all here for the whole trope of like, oh, this woman hates men. She's a man-hating feminist who's secretly a lesbian and she's taking it out on the poor innocent men of the world. I'm not here for that. But in this case, there is a unique circumstance of like a woman in the Mormon faith who is using this to fuel a grift, the type of which this community encourages. So what's happening here is kind of a strange situation. Again, in the next section, we're going to have to discuss how strict religious communities can foster these types of behavior. But anyway, Jody hates men, and she has a reputation of accusing every male client that she meets of having a porn addiction or of cheating on his wife, things like that. So sometimes couples would like come to Jody for counseling, but no matter what their initial issue was, she'd always find a way into twisting it to convince the man that he had a porn addiction all along, or convincing this guy's wife that the fact that he ever looked at another woman for too long, or noticed that another woman was pretty, or talked to his female coworkers or things like that, that was a sign that he was actually having an affair. Along the way, a lot of divorces happened as a result of Jody. Like Ruby, Jody is portrayed here as someone who clearly sees herself as this godlike figure, someone who never is wrong, she can never be wrong about anything. Ruby instantly connects with Jody and is like, oh my god, you're just like me, you're the best, you should give my kids therapy, and you should give all of us life coaching. The first person in the family to receive Jody's counseling services is Chad, whom Ruby is just convinced is a troubled teen, despite the fact that he's a pretty normal kid who just likes to goof around sometimes, which is what every kid does. Shari is initially really skeptical of Jody. As Chad starts doing sessions with her, Chad seems to become less and less like himself. For example, Jody encourages Ruby to stop letting Chad play football, even though Chad is currently like a star high school football player. He could feasibly get a college scholarship through football. But Jody's like, no, football's a distraction. It's not letting Chad heal from his sinful ways as a toxic man. So Ruby forces Chad to leave the football team. Shari finds this very concerning, and she is not on board with Jody at all. But like any good aspiring cult leader, Jody has a great thought-stopping technique to deal with Shari. Jody explains that if someone doesn't like her or doesn't trust her, that means they need her help even more. The very fact that Shari doesn't trust her is a sign that Shari is broken inside and needs Jody's therapy. This is a very common cult leader control tactic. You gotta convince the person you're trying to recruit that they can't trust any source of information except for you, and if they don't trust you, that's a sign that they need you even more because you're the only person they can trust. So of course, Ruby makes Shari go to therapy with Jody as well. Just to be clear, Ruby did not like Shari going to therapy when that therapist helped Shari stand up for herself, but now that Ruby has found someone who loves to exert the same exact type of lockstep control over their patients, now Ruby thinks therapy is a fantastic idea for Shari. During these sessions, Jody focuses on teaching Shari how to have less self-esteem. When Shari expresses that she's feeling confident about an upcoming test at school, Jody tells her that she shouldn't be so arrogant and that she needs to practice negative self-talk. So before a test, instead of telling herself, I know this material, I can do this, I'm gonna do great, Shari should instead start telling herself something like, I'm probably gonna fail this test, I don't know anything, I'm just a stupid little girl. So Shari starts practicing negative self-talk, and surprise, it makes her feel worse about herself. But Jody promises her that in the long run, it's gonna be good for her. To Shari's horror, soon Ruby invites Jody to come live with them in their house. At this point, Sherry's preparing to leave for college soon, and Ruby tells Jody that she can have Sherry's room. To be clear, Sherry has not yet left for college. She's still living there, and Ruby just gave up her bedroom to a creepy grifter that is aiming to start a cult. But Ruby sees no problem. Sherry can just sleep in the basement after all. These parents really seem to enjoy taking away their kids' access to sleeping arrangements. That's so weird. So Jody moves in. Shortly after, Jody starts having these night terrors, and Ruby's like, I should move into Sherry's old room with Jody to help her. So Ruby stops sleeping in the same bed as Kevin and starts sleeping in the same bed as Jody. This is going exactly where you think it is. There's one particular instance Sherry notes where she sees her mother leaving the bedroom in the middle of the night with Jody still in the room, and Ruby's hair is all messed up. She's in a robe, but she's mostly naked. It's clear what was going on, okay? The book pretty much confirms that Ruby was cheating on Kevin with Jody. Kevin eventually approaches Sherry and explains that due to his sessions with Jody, he's realized that he too is exhibiting addictive behaviors, and Jody has suggested that he move out of their house for a bit so he can work on himself. So Kevin abandons the family and gets his own apartment. As Sherry was recounting these things, especially as I heard it told in her own voice through the audiobook, I could not get over how much this felt like a horror movie. Like, one by one, this girl is noticing each member of her family get more and more brainwashed by this woman who's trying to start a cult along with her mother. Every time Sherry thinks she can trust someone, Jody ends up then also convincing them otherwise. Even Chad eventually gives into Jody's manipulations, and even he leaves Sherry behind too. So at this point, Sherry's starting to feel like she has no parental guidance. Her mom, who's always been emotionally unavailable, now spends all her time with Jody. Her dad is now a shell of his former self as Jody works on tearing their marriage apart. Sherry's over here like, can I have a single scrap of parenting, please? So Sherry starts seeking out other mentorships in her church community, which could be a very good thing at times. Finding familial relationships within your community outside of your blood family is so important, especially for people who really need that support or don't have other people to lean on in their life. These concepts of like found family and chosen family are so important, especially when people grow up feeling isolated or like they don't have someone who understands them. The problem is that in this process, somebody who's in Sherry's position, who is seeking connection with an older adult, is also in the prime position for another person to swoop in and take advantage of her. So Sherry starts spending time with this married, middle-aged man in her church named Derek. Derek is always there to talk to Sherry on the phone. He's always willing to meet up with her. He listens to her. He gives her advice. He fills the roles that Ruby and Kevin are currently failing to fill for her. However, there are definitely some early red flags with Derek. Because Sherry is in an emotionally vulnerable position, she doesn't notice these red flags right away. For example, Derek really likes telling Sherry how pretty she is. He likes to comment on her appearance quite a lot for someone who's that much older than her. At one point, Sherry calls Derek dad by accident. Now, if Derek really was trying to, in good faith, fill this type of role for Sherry, he might find this charming. He might laugh it off. He might talk to Sherry about what having that type of mentorship relationship means for her, or, you know, what type of therapy and stuff she might need to go through to heal throughout this process. He might try to help set her up with the tools to be independent along the way, things like that. But no, instead, Derek gets so offended when Sherry calls him dad. He gets so upset about it. He gets mad that Sherry thinks of him as a surrogate father figure. And that's, of course, for exactly the reason you think it is. It's not long until Derek assaults Sherry for the first time, where whenever he touches her inappropriately, he frames it saying things like, you know, you're going to college soon. You're eventually going to have a husband before too long, so you need to be ready for when he touches you like this. This is just practice. Like, it's so gross. It's so predatory. Sherry doesn't give explicit details about what exactly Derek does, but it is very clear that he SAs her multiple times over a period of months. Sherry's parents have absolutely no idea this is going on. Derek also starts emotionally manipulating Sherry. For example, when Sherry leaves to stay with some family friends who open up their home to her, Derek will send her texts saying like, you know, this family secretly thinks you're a burden, right? They're just too polite to tell you should leave, but you should leave. He'll be like, you should leave and come stay with me because these people don't actually want you here. It's very gross, very manipulative behavior. He also convinces Sherry to give him permission to see her location from her phone so that he can stalk her. Sherry eventually becomes afraid of Derek and starts leaving her phone behind behind when she goes somewhere so that he can't follow her, which eventually leads to him just incessantly calling her, demanding to know where she is, showing up like at her location unannounced, just nonstop textbook creepy stalker behavior. Thankfully, Shari is able to seek out mentorships in her church from people who are not creeps, and they're able to set her up with a legitimate therapist, and through the process of going through real therapy, Shari is eventually able to stand up to Derek and cut him out of her life. As Shari goes through college, she struggles with trying to maintain a relationship with her father, who doesn't currently want contact with the family because Jody told him that he needs to stay away from every member of the family while he's working on himself. Jody really likes to isolate people so that she can then exert full control over them, and that is exactly what she does to both Ruby and Kevin, albeit in very different ways. While Shari's in college, she refuses to cut off contact with Ruby, even though she is long past the point of thinking she and Ruby can ever have a healthy relationship, but she doesn't want to cut Ruby off because then Ruby's going to block her from being able to see her younger siblings. The younger kids are still in Ruby's custody, which means they're also still under Jody's influence, and Shari wants to make sure that she still has contact with those kids. Eventually, Ruby decides to sell the family home. Jody tricks Kevin into signing over permission, and then Ruby and Jody intend to move in together. I honestly think that if this had been allowed to go on longer than it actually had, I personally think Ruby and Jody would have straight up started like a full death cult, like massive plot of land, hundreds of people living there and worshiping them. It really seemed to be going down that path. But while Ruby and Jody were off doing God knows what, the younger siblings were left unattended for 5 full days. This includes kids as young as 12 with no adult involvement for the better part of a week, no idea where their mother had gone, not being fed, not being cared for, not being looked after. One day, Shari gets a call that the police had finally arrested her mother for child abuse and neglect. To be clear, this was not the first time that Child Protective Services had been called on the family, but it was the first time that they found hard evidence that could lead to Ruby's arrest. Shari talks a lot about the free-range parenting laws that they have in Utah, how free-range parenting can be like a good thing in terms of, letting your kids play outside, letting them connect with nature, not having your kids have to be like sitting at home with you watching them while they're on an iPad all day. Like there's upsides to it, but that because these particular laws are so lax, it can be really hard to prosecute legitimate cases of child neglect because there's so many legal loopholes. Unfortunately, it took way too long for the authorities to get these kids out of Ruby's house, but eventually they did. Towards the end of the book, Shari discusses what it means for someone to be a narcissist or to have narcissistic personality disorder. Shari does believe legitimately that Ruby does have narcissistic personality disorder. I can't speak to the validity of that either way. I'm not a mental health professional. I don't know exactly how that's going to play out in each person, but I do think it is fair to examine the ways that Ruby treated her children more as an extension of herself rather than their own autonomous beings, and that would explain a lot as why she forced them to act as these characters on her twisted reality show, why she subjected them to someone like Jody when it became clear that Jody was someone who would allow her to further control the kids. For Ruby, control seemed to be the main motivating factor in her life. If she could control other people, she could feel in control of her own life. Shari examines how Ruby's own upbringing may have also contributed to that, the whole cycle of abuse and all of that, the idea of like hurt people. And I think that through writing this book, Shari is helping to break that cycle by examining how these patterns of behavior can go unchallenged for far too long. At the same time, I am left wondering if there's a piece missing, a piece examining how these greater social structures around them allowed these practices to continue unchecked. And that's why we need to get into our next section here, okay? Should the Mormon Church take some of the blame? I want to make this clear going into it, okay? I never had any expectation that Shari would do like a full 180 from devout Mormon to like a full-blown atheist, especially in the span of a year, especially in an emotionally fraught period of healing. And Shari never needs to give up her faith. I don't think she needs to give up her beliefs. They can be very helpful for her personally, but I do think that this is a reason that this book may have benefited from more time and distance. If this book had come out maybe 10 years in the future, there might have been more reflection into how a lot of the structures built into the Mormon Church allowed this to happen. Again, I don't expect Shari to like denounce Mormonism entirely or to completely leave her beliefs behind, but I think the book could benefit some reflection on the ways that the structures surrounding this religion enabled these things to happen. So here's a huge example, okay? Remember Derek? There's a point in the book where Shari starts to think that the things that Derek did to her might be her fault. This is a very common response from a victim of assault. A lot of times the victim might convince themselves that maybe they put themselves in that situation or it was their own fault. It can be a coping mechanism as a way to feel like you still have some control of the situation even when all of your autonomy has been stripped from you. Shari starts to worry that she might be impure because of the ways that Derek interacted with her, so she decides to talk to her bishop about it. Her bishop is very understanding. He's sympathetic. He expresses like he's so sorry she had to go through this, but he does say that he is obligated to report it higher up on the chain. The bishop eventually reports back to Shari that she's going to have to face consequences. She's going to lose some of her privileges within the church because even though Derek was in a position of power over her, Shari did still quote unquote consensually engage in these things. At least that's kind of the justification that they gave. So Shari is devastated when she gets these news, and I was infuriated. Why should Shari have to face any punishment when she is the victim? The problem is that this isn't an isolated incident. And to be fair, I don't know a lot of Mormons personally, but every Mormon or ex-Mormon woman that I've ever talked to, every single one has had a story of being SA'd by a man in their church community, and every single one of them has a story of how the church either tried to cover it up or punish the woman for her supposed lack of purity when she was actually the victim in the scenario. Every single one. So in examining this book, I'm not saying that we should walk away from it going like, wow, Mormons suck. I don't think it's fair to generalize all people of any demographic or religious group that way. I think that's awful. Rather, I think we need to walk away from it saying like, wow, certain communities absolutely have the potential to enable abuse, and we need to be on the lookout for those red flags for those types of things and that behavior, and question whether certain structures are beneficial or whether they are allowing these things to continue to happen. It goes back to the very beginning of the book when Shari discussed how Mormon culture encourages family vlogging. Maybe it's a controversial opinion, but I personally think family vlogging is a disgusting business in general. I don't necessarily even think it should be legal. I think we need to discuss the ways that Mormon beliefs in women birthing and raising a lot of kids, documenting everything for future generations, and needing to make income from home, how all of those things combine to specifically encourage this extremely unethical practice. On top of that, there's that whole thing with Ruby and Jody having a sexual relationship with each other while both publicly denouncing homosexuality and refusing to support same-gender relationships. I'm saying when a community of people ostracize certain types of relationships or ostracize entire demographics of people, it's not that surprising when people find ways to justify their own behavior while hypocritically judging others for doing the same things. And to be clear, in the case of Shari's childhood, Ruby was the abuser. Ruby was an individual, an adult who made her own choices. I'm not saying that the environment of Utah or the backdrop of the Mormon church in any way deserves the blame that Ruby got or excuses any of Ruby's behavior. I'm saying that sometimes communities like this enable people like Ruby and Jody to do the types of things that they did. Their very structures make it hard to find the resources to end these cycles of abuse. For more discussions about the Mormon angles in this book, I recommend checking out the Mormon Stories podcast episode about the 8 passengers vlog and all of that. I'm going to link all the videos I reference in the description below, so please check those out. This story is wild. What's next? Well, I hope what's next for Shari is a peaceful and independent life because Lord knows that woman deserves it. And I hope what's next for family vlogs is that more and more of them get shut down. I really hope we can keep seeing more examples of family vlogs, the ones that are acting this way. I'm hoping we can see more of those practices being exposed so that people understand the dangers behind this practice. But in the meantime, like, I think it's safest to just unsubscribe from every family vlog. Please don't give them views. Just don't do it. If this practice isn't going to be illegal, at the very least, we don't have to financially support it. I really like that Shari discusses some of the legal precedents that allow these things to happen, such as the free-range parenting laws in Utah, how making those laws stricter might be beneficial. I'm not a lawyer. I don't live in Utah. I don't think I've ever even been there, so I'm not going to comment on the specifics of that, but I do like the ways that Shari opens up that discussion in this book. And I'm also hoping that in the future we can get to a point where family vlogs are not able to thrive on YouTube anymore. We're already at the point where, like, you can't have a comment section or run ads on videos that are targeted at children, so why should people be able to make money if the channels are featuring children? Much like the similar books I've discussed, I'm hoping that having yet another unintended intentional child stars share their side of the story online continues to embolden people to speak out against child labor and against people putting children on reality TV or in monetized vlogs on the internet. Despite how painful this book was to read at times, I'm really glad that Shari felt empowered to tell us her story. It's so important that people in these positions get to reclaim their own lives, get to take charge of their own narratives, and get to reclaim their rightful place as hero of their own stories. So if you're wondering, do I recommend reading this book? 100% absolutely. It's very difficult to get through at times. It can be very heartbreaking, and there's definitely a lot of scenes where it's going to be like emotionally jarring. So if you're not in an emotional place where you can handle a lot of the themes in this book, I'd understand holding off on reading it. But also, yes, I do highly recommend it. I think it is a fantastic exploration of everything going on here. So I want to say a huge thank you to Shari Franke for opening up with so many people in this way, especially after she was forced to open up to millions of people on YouTube as a child. I never expect anyone in her position to speak out like this necessarily, because I would fully understand if she just wanted to fade into obscurity and have a life of privacy after all of this. But I also think that it's extremely courageous for her to choose to put her story out there, and I think it's going to help a lot of people. I've been saying for years that one day the children of influencers are going to grow up and expose how unethical all of this is, and one by one we're finally starting to see it happen. I know that today's video dealt with some more serious topics, but I want to give everyone a thank you right now just for sticking with me anyway on this one. On a lighter note, my next video is going to be back to funny literary hijinks because I have officially hit 100,000 subscribers. So as I wrap up this video, I also want to extend a major thank you to, a couple different groups of people. First, thank you to my Patreon supporters for continuing to support the work that I do on this channel. It honestly means everything to me that you guys enjoy my work and want to help me keep making more of it. On top of that, I want to thank every single one of you who is subscribed to this channel for helping me hit that milestone of 100,000. Honestly, that has been pretty much my only subscriber goal for the entire time I've had this channel, which is now 6.5 years. During the past 6.5 years of having this channel and making videos, I have fallen more and more in love with the process of video creation, every single step of the process, from the research to the scripting, the filming and editing, all of it. When I started this channel back in 2018, there were still parts of me that were in boss babe mode, and it was so easy for me to measure my success only by how many views I got or how many more of my own books I sold as a result of having an online audience. But one of the greatest joys of growing very slowly on this channel is how much I've been able to learn about what makes a video great, what makes something that you guys are going to enjoy and remember in the long run. 6 years into being a YouTuber, I've got to say there is nothing that compares to the joy of falling really deep down a rabbit hole, just plunging deep into research about a topic or the nuances of a book, finding ways to share that knowledge and open up that discussion with you guys. There's nothing that compares to that joy. A reason I really love reviewing books like the book we just talked about today is that I love examining the power behind storytelling, what it means for each of us to control our own narrative. And having hit just such a huge YouTube milestone, this is hitting even harder right now. You guys have all given me an opportunity to share my love for discussing literature and geeking out over American Girl dolls or Star Trek or women's sports or parts of speech or syntax or whatever else I decide to discuss that day. I can't even begin to describe how much that means to me. So thank you to everyone who has ever watched this channel, especially if you watched it back in 2018 where I had 100 subscribers, almost all from my Girl Wash Your Face review. Those who stood with me through all of my weird hair changes, through my process of slowly learning to do makeup, through my girl boss deconstruction and my gym bro era and everything in between. I'll be back in a couple weeks with another book review for you guys, but in the meantime, keep reading, keep talking about what you read. I'm going to be so excited to join you again for our next book discussion over here. Thanks so much, friends. Bye.